In this documentary, we examine the role and performance of Iranian F-14 Tomcat fighter jets in defending Iran's skies against Israeli airstrikes. Join us as we cover everything from hunting drones and incoming missiles to the request to attack the Israeli fleet inside Iraqi territory and the potential confrontation with F-35 fighters on the common border with Iraq. The Israeli airstrikes in April and October can be considered the largest airstrikes on Iran since the Iran-Iraq War. These attacks were unprecedented in terms of volume and the number of participating aircraft in the last 40 years, and were met with a strong response from Iran's air defense and air force. Among these defenses, one of Iran's most important pieces of equipment during these attacks was the fleet of F-14 Tomcat interceptor fighters. Despite their age and the need for upgrades, these fighters continue to be responsible for defending Iran's skies and territory. For this reason, many questions have always been raised about these fighters and their role in defending the country's skies during the April attacks and Operation Repentance. Despite the media's silence of the Iranian armed forces, many Tomcats were active in this battle and succeeded in hunting several targets during these missile and drone attacks. Interestingly, the pilots requested engagement with the Israeli fighters before they launched their missiles towards Iran, and apparently the reason for the F-35s approaching Iranian territory was the possibility of aerial engagement with this fleet. In this video, we intend to examine the missions of this fleet during the Israeli attacks and analyze their performance. The F-14 fighter must be considered one of the best fighters in the history of Iranian aviation. For about 50 years, as the most advanced fighter of the Iranian Air Force, this fighter has been responsible for defending the country's skies. A fighter that even old age and structural fatigue could not prevent from flying, and according to reports, it will continue to serve Iran as one of the guardians of the land of Persia for at least another 5 to 10 years. Because of this, several minor and major upgrades have been made to its radar, avionics, and weapons, bringing it closer to the fourth-generation fighters and above the standard of a simple fourth-generation fighter. But what missions did the Tomcat really have during the Israeli attacks? Let's go back to April 2024, when the first wave of Israeli attacks on Iran took place after Operation True Promise, an operation that, unlike Operation Repentance in October, was not publicized at all. The reason for this lack of publicity must be considered the very good performance of the Iranian air and air defense fleet. During this operation, the Israeli Air Force had the mission to target facilities in Natanz and Fordow, the 8th Tactical Fighter Base, and several Iranian air defense sites in several waves of airstrikes. An unknown number of Israeli fighters, both for bombing and for escorting the fleet, crossed the Syrian sky into Iraqi airspace and launched missiles and suicide drones from near the Iranian border in several waves of attacks. But in imitation of Iran's Operation True Promise, which had been leaked hours before the attack, Iran's air defense was also aware of the time of the Israeli attack. Apart from war readiness, all air defense sites and numerous radars of F-4, F-5, and F-14 fighters were responsible for identifying and engaging targets. Among these fighters, the Tomcat, due to its longer-range radar and more accurate missiles, was responsible for defending the nuclear and oil industries and its main base. The Tomcats were also patrolling the border to prevent the infiltration of enemy fighters. In short, Iranian air defense was able to engage with a large number of attacking missiles and attacking drones, and all attacks that had been carried out from outside the Iranian border were hunted down by these sites. But unfortunately, 2 or more suicide drones were able to cross the range and coverage of the air defense sites by using the coverage of the region's uneven terrain, and were moving towards the Fordow and Natanz nuclear facilities after passing through several important air defense sites in Iran. This stealth crossing was quickly identified by the Tomcat air fleet and ground-based radars, and was reported to the Unified Air Defense Command. Since 2 Tomcats were flying near the city of Qom, they received the mission to hunt down the Israeli suicide drones, and the 2 fighters succeeded in hunting down several Israeli suicide drones, probably of the Harop type. It should be noted that this hunt was also carried out by firing Fakur missiles. After this incident, the 8th Tactical Fighter Base was attacked by infiltrators with suicide quadcopters, and an Iranian 300 radar was also taken out of service. All in all, the Tomcats succeeded in hunting down the approaching drones during the first attack. But the story is a little different during the second airstrikes. It was in October that the Israeli Air Fleet, which had failed in its first attack, had the mission to target several important Iranian air defense or missile sites in Operation Repentance by all means. For this reason, 103 Israeli fighters, more than half of the attacking aircraft, including F-15 and F-16 with bombing missions, and the rest F-35s and other air fleets equipped with air-to-air missiles to engage Iranian Tomcats, attacked Iran. During this attack, considering the experiences that both sides, Iran and Israel, had gained, both sides had made heavy changes in their air defense sectors. In order to prevent the recurrence of the previous incident, the Iranian Air Force launched a new initiative, and the Iranian Tomcat fleet, with a new formation, was responsible for air defense and identification in these attacks. In this formation, 2 Tomcats, along with a Sukhoi 24, simulated an AWACS. 2 Tomcats were responsible for aerial search, and the Sukhoi 24 was also responsible for having a better surface scanning radar, which is responsible for identifying targets at low altitude. When the Israeli air fleet approached, these fighters moved towards these waves under the guidance of the command center, in order to better identify these missiles. Israel's operation took place in 3 waves, with reconnaissance, tanker, bomber, and interceptor aircraft participating. The first wave of attacks was carried out with cruise missiles to saturate Iran's air defense, which was suppressed by air defense. The Tomcats of the Air Force, which were present in the area, more than 6 to 10 aircraft, requested engagement with the targets to the air defense. But the command did not allow engagement with the targets near the western border, due to the high level of air defense engagement and the possibility of friendly fire, engagement with own forces, and the Tomcats were assigned the task of defending important nuclear and oil centers. But in this wave of attacks, unlike the previous attack, the Israelis focused on using air-launched ballistic missiles. They were well aware of Iran's anti-cruise missile system. The Tomcats active in the Qom and Isfahan region managed to hunt down all the cruise missiles. But because of the use of ballistic missiles, a number of Israeli missiles managed to cross Iran's air and ground defense and hit targets in Iran. Iran's air defense and our long-range radars also identified a third wave from the sky of Iraq. The Tomcats present in the area were tasked with approaching the western borders to prevent a similar attack, because the air defense had identified the approach of a number of Israeli F-35 fighters. These fighters were approaching the Iranian border, due to the engagement of a battalion of Bavar system in the west. The Iranian Tomcats and the Israeli F-35s were approaching the zero border area between the Iranian and Iraqi borders, and the fighters of both sides were in a state of war, and on the verge of being in the range of fire. The mission of the Tomcat in this operation was, in the first place, to prevent the suppression of the Bavar system defense, and in the second place, to prevent the entry of hostile fighters into Iran. Before the start of the third wave, the Force Command had given the fleet the order to fire at will. Also, the Israeli fighters fired several cruise missiles to hunt down the engaged Bavar system. Of course, a 3rd Khordad battalion under the command of the Unified Air Defense was present in the area from before, which was able to engage with the cruise missiles by creating an air defense layer. The Israeli F-35s, after observing the activation of the 3rd Khordad battalion, the approach of the Tomcats, and the reactivation of the Bavar system, and radar lock on a number of Israeli fighters near the border, received the order to retreat. After the retreat of the Israeli fleet, the Iranian Tomcats requested permission to cross the border and attack the Israeli fleet before the start of the next wave of attacks, but finally, by order of the command, due to the possibility of a trap, the Tomcat fleet received the order to retreat again. The third wave also began, but this wave, unlike the second wave, was much lighter, and the air defense again engaged with most of the missiles fired. In total, according to a narrative that we have received, about 140 guided cruise and ballistic missiles were fired at Iran, of which Iran's air defense successfully managed to suppress about 90 missiles. However, about 10 to 12 targets were hit inside Iran, most of which were ballistic missiles that reached their targets by passing through the atmosphere and out of the air defense range of the country's air fleet and air defense. It should be noted that the Bavar system targeted all the missiles in its range, but 2 ballistic missiles, which were fired a little further from the border, managed to escape the maximum engagement range of the Bavar system by gaining altitude quickly, and the Bavar system could not hunt them down after entering the atmosphere. Considering the firing of the Bavar system's air defense missiles and the radar lock on the missiles, if the missiles had remained in the Bavar system's range, they would have been hunted down by Iran's air defense system. Also, the Iranian Tomcats played a very important role in identifying aerial targets and cruise missiles and reporting them to the unified air defense system during these clashes. Of course, Iran's air defense was also able to prevent friendly fire and engagement with the Iranian fleet by the Israeli fleet, despite the presence of the Iranian fleet in the area. In general, the performance of Iran's air defense during these attacks was acceptable. But the truth is that if the situation of our air fleet was a little better, the fighters could have prevented the second and third waves of attacks by creating air cover deep inside Iraqi territory and further away from the range of the Bavar air defense system, which covers 200 to 250 kilometers of Iraqi territory. The exact scenario that the Israelis used to attack Iran should be used by Iran to prevent an attack on Iran. However, considering that the new fighters have not yet been activated, and considering the overall performance of the air defense and the Tomcat fleet, this defense should be considered a good defense. Certainly with the entry into service of the Sukhoi 35 fighters, which 2 of them have recently completed testing. If this scenario is repeated, the Israeli fleet will have to be very careful, because Iran's air defense will not be watching this time as it did before, and definitely confronting the attacking fighters to prevent attacks again will be on the agenda of Iran's armed forces. Thank you for being with us until the end of this documentary. Please visit our channel for other videos.